Welcome back to Dirty 20, everybody. Today we're back once again with our main homebrew master, Erik, here to drop the knowledge. And we're going to start getting a little bit deeper. You know, we've kind of covered the surface of homebrewing, you know, the stuff that you're going to start initially to take steps into. But now we're slowly going to wade deeper into the tidal oceans of the great ancient gods. And we're going to talk homebrewing hardcore. No, not hardcore homebrewing, but certainly...
that's where we can start, in fact.
Okay.
5e hardcore mode.
There we go. Yes. Talk to me, Erik.
Yes, so we started last episode to talk about the common homebrews, and something that has come up a lot recently is that sort of gritty, low magic kind of additions to 5e. Of course, the reason why is because 5e is so big and it's such an adaptable system,
yes.
But what it doesn't, or rather what it is high fantasy.
Yes,
it assumes that you're in a world where everyone knows that magic exists. Everyone's met a magic user. The world is populated with lots and lots of people who studied or have, you know, connections with other planes, and it's very accessible. And you eventually end up having this sort of reality-changing magic.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, you also have very, very high hit point pools. You can sustain a lot of injuries and a lot of stress before a character starts struggling.
It's almost like considered a little bit unrealistic, right? Like
yes, I mean it is. Like yeah. It's heroic. It's a little bit. It's playing with that sort of superhero kind of
trope
branch.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that then, you know, you have the death saving throw. So even when you drop, you can be healed and just come back, and even if you die, you can be resurrected. That's all part of the sort of core high fantasy ideal or trope, as you put it. So there's been a big sort of influx of Dungeons and Dragons 5e low magic, gritty, deadly homebrew. And the 5e hardcore mode is exactly that. I believe it's available on the
Dungeon Masters Guild.
DM's Guild. Exactly. And what it does is that it's a set of tweaks and changes to the rules or homebrews that slowly adapts it to bring it down to what then often is referred to as low magic, which is the fact that magicians and wizards are far between. Often they serve as, you know, a counselor to a king, or, you know, they run things from behind the scenes. Most people have never heard it. If they see magic, they will be sort of taken aback.
Right.
But how do we homebrew that? How do we make the rules reflect that? That's really what those homebrews are about. There's also one that called Darkest Dungeons that's influenced very much by the PC game Darkest Dungeon. And it strives very much to do the same thing, like bring down the magic and make things dark, gritty, etc. So let's jump into the 5e magic system, right?
Okay, yeah, let's talk about it, because that is definitely the you know, one of the main areas where, if you're looking to adapt D&D or any RPG to fifth edition in particular, to a more low magic kind of campaign, then the magic system is the first place you've got to look, right?
Yeah, indeed. And there are other reasons to change this magic system as well. And of course, for those that aren't super familiar with it, it uses a set of levels of more and more powerful spells that you unlock, but you can only cast them with what is called spell slots that is equal to the level of the spell.
It's very confusing.
It can get really confusing,
When you start when you start out in D&D, you're not going to play a magic caster unless your name's Erik Johansson, because as you heard in a previous episode, his first character was indeed a wizard.
It's true. Jumped straight in there. In a weird way, the older system, which is 5e, is based on, which is where you memorized exact spells. So if you wanted to cast magic missiles and you memorized one magic missiles, that means you could only cast it once. So if it was a common spell, you would memorize it 3 times. In a weird way, that was easier to keep track of than having 5 different spell levels and 2 to 4 slots in each.
A slot of this or that, have you upcast, or it's not great.
No, indeed. And just to tie it back then to 5e hardcore mode, for example, it's the risk reward then. If magic is rare or low magic, why is it low magic? Either it's because you need to be a powerful individual, or maybe it's inaccessible, or there's risk involved. It's a powerful energy that people can't deal with because it corrupts you, it can go wrong, etc. And that's why you tie those together to start homebrewing it. Don't quote me now, because I'm not quoting the 5e hardcore mode book, but I know vaguely how they did it there. But there are 2 main things, so the Star Wars that Gallifine did, he then said, okay, well, get rid of the spell slots and turn them into points.
Yes, point system.
Exactly. And that's a really clever system, because essentially what he's done is that you've gotten rid of all of these spell slots and having to keep track of level 1, 2, 3 up to 9, and instead you have one pool of points, but
you can spend casting.
Exactly, but then a higher level spell costs more points. Which means that you're almost then back to spell slots, like it works, limits you to a similar way, but
it's a little bit easier to keep track of, and that's the thing. I think that approach is good, but it doesn't really solve the low magic issue.
That's right, exactly.
What would you say to someone who was saying, well, I kind of want to play a more, I was about to say Lord of the Rings, but that's pretty high magic.
It's an interesting one. I will keep that to one side for a moment, but I understand the
discussion for another day. So
exactly.
What would the steps be?
So we're gonna ignore the most obvious one, just because it's not really homebrew, and that's when the DM comes in and say, hey, this is a low magic world. You can't play a wizard.
Or maybe if you do, you're going to be the only one, and you're outlawed. You can cast in public. I think Sam, one of our friends who we played with before, a friend of the show as well, he was creating a world where magic was outlawed, and therefore, if you did play a wizard, then you were running a very serious risk of getting in trouble with the authority. But that's the easy fix, right?
Exactly. And I would say that's a really good way to do it, but it's not homebrew. It's not reflected in the rules. And we're talking homebrew. So how are we going to do that? Well, another one is, of course, to then start saying, hey, you can only multi-class, you have a restriction to how many levels, but let's remove that option as well. The first one that a lot of people talk about, and this has been mentioned in some other YouTube channels and things, is let's make a dice roll to successfully cast a spell.
Yes, because so a skill check to see if a spell can go off or not.
Exactly. Where you then go, okay, you're going to cast that spell, and in 5e you use your resources, etc. The spell happens, maybe you roll dice to see if you hit or not. We're going one step where we say, okay, we're not doing that yet. You're actually going to roll to see if the spell even happens.
Right.
And we immediately then add the critical failure, the natural 1.
Yes.
Because when you cast a spell and you roll a natural 1, it's going to go wrong.
This is something that you have implemented in your kind of homebrew testing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I love it.
We played with it a little bit, indeed, and in fact, some of that came from me looking at some of those. So as I said, Darkest Dungeons, 5e hardcore mode, and Deathbringer are all homebrew adaptations that I recommend looking at and playing, I have borrowed from them, and they all start messing with the magic system because that's a good one to go to. So I recommend those. I borrow from them, so credit to those 3 sources, even though I haven't copied anything, but yes, I've done similar.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very good point. I think that you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. In future episodes, you'll see that Erik is very much trying to reinvent the wheel. But
that's true.
You don't have to quite go that far, right? There's a lot of resources, things like Sage Advice and the Dungeon Master Guide should be like one of your first ports of call. Sage Advice, I think, is it's a blog or like a Twitter account that Wizards of the Coast run, and they kind of answer questions for people when there's interpretation issues. But yeah, definitely, third-party stuff. Hardcore is a popular one. We talked about Grit and Glory with Gallifile.
Yes, that's true.
Well.
Yep.
And yeah.
But to sort of bring it back to the magic again and the low magic is that now when you have to roll to cast a spell and a natural 1 is a danger that somehow makes things go wrong. Now the rules start representing why the magic is rare and dangerous, because you're gonna have your fireball and it may not go off, or you may roll a natural 1, and now the spell is centered on you. Every time you cast your spell, you're gonna go, is it gonna be worth it?
Yeah, exactly. I gotta say, one of my favorite moments that we had was a spell failure, and it became such an epic like story moment as well. Which is when we were trying to release the demon from the armor, and it went terribly wrong.
Bad. Yes. Yeah. No, indeed, and it just opens up for so many more epic storytelling adventures. Of course, you have to now let go of that idea that you're playing to win the system or it's a game. We're using the homebrew rules to reflect an atmosphere or a flavor into the game, not just by banning wizards or having the gods be like suspicious of the wizard, but by making his spells in combat feel dangerous to the player. The character goes, ooh, maybe I should do something else because I need to stay safe. He's not looking about, oh, how many spell slots do I have and do I need them later? He literally asks himself, am I gonna kill someone? And that leads to what I think is so good about it, is that you start being happy when your spells go off and decimate.
Yes. No, that's very true. It's very true, and you're much more conscious. You're much less likely to start spamming spells, which is something that you kind of feel that is an inevitability with certain spells, in 5e especially. Okay, let me ask you this, because we don't have a lot of time for this episode. Do we save firearms for the next show, or do we spend a couple of minutes talking about it?
Okay, so let's talk a few minutes about it, because it is a tricky one, because similar to what we talked about, grittiness and low magic, firearms is something a lot of people are looking at. The reason why, I think, is because, as you mentioned at some point, these fantasy worlds sort of are default Renaissance, pre-industrial revolution, and then you look at history and you go, okay, but that means gunpowder can be done in a vat by stirring, or from manure, and other processes. So maybe they've started dabbling. Matt Mercer's subclass that was played in Critical Role the first season was a gunpowder class, and it's a tricky one, and it has been done over and over again. And as we said, there's one in a Dungeon Master's Guide where you can go and have a look at it. And the first thing that comes up is, how are we gonna, what damage is it gonna deal?
Right.
Because is it a firebolt? Is it a crossbow? If it deals the same damage as a crossbow, then that doesn't give you that oomph of a firearm.
If you're looking for like proper, like, a firearm to be doing what it's supposed to do,
but
it doesn't do it.
Exactly. But then you also can't just up the damage dice, because then, okay, now it's just better. So now
everyone's gonna go into get a firearm.
So what do we do? Well, we make it deal more damage, but we make it blow up in your face. That's the most common way to go, just like we said about the spells. Which can be a really tricky one, because obviously when the spellcaster fails his spell, he can just attempt another one as long as he didn't die from the tragic mishap. But when a firearm user, his gun, gets jammed or explodes,
they've got to spend an action to do something. It then becomes like just boring kind of
minutia. Exactly. And it feels like such a downer for the person.
I've yet to really find a way to include firearms without them being like items,
exactly.
We talked a little bit about my lantern before we went on camera, and my lantern in my Forgotten Realms campaigns is a steampunk. It's a place that is going through an industrial revolution. So it's
a really tricky. It's just a really tricky one if you want to meld it with the spells and the Renaissance thing.
Right.
And I think, personally, I've designed one main firearm that I feel like I like my design. So I'll quickly just talk about that, because you can slot it straight into 5e, and it's the Starwheeler pistol. For those that don't know, this is not my idea, because it's essentially a revolver from the Spelljammer universe, right? And it's called a Starwheeler pistol. I went with the idea that it's very much a hand crossbow. So now I know that it's it stays balanced. However, it's lost the ability of getting rid of the loading, so you can only ever fire it once. However, I then lowered the dice to D4, and you go, okay, so what's the point here? I gave it exploding dice, which means that when you roll that dice and you roll a 4 for its damage, you roll another one. And if that's
I've always liked that.
You roll another one, and you keep going. And because it's a D4, it's a 1 in 4 chance that you'll at least get 2 D4.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you start going, okay, it's not better than the other weapons. It's different. It doesn't work like one of the spells, because it's different. Sometimes it's going to be worse. Sometimes it's going to be better. And then, as you may know, you then get the fan out action, to drive home that sort of extra firearm. Okay, you can a fan out, for those that don't know, is the classic sort of
gunslinger
revolver where you empty your whole the word has the word has escaped me, but the revolving part of the revolver, which then again in my Starwheeler then gives you an ability to fire it lots of times in one turn, and then you're done for the combat.
Right. Yeah, you can't use it again.
Exactly.
Right.
So
I've liked that.
So to wrap that up, firearms are really tricky. I'm not sure exactly where I stand, so I make them different. I don't want them to be better. I don't like the idea that they explode in your face and gets destroyed. By all means, go ahead and do that, but I don't feel like that melds very well with 5e. So I think make them different. Come up with some way they work different. Make your blunderbuss similar to a burning hands or something, right?
Right. Again, using spells as like inspiration for items and things like that. Yeah. For me, I would say my advice would be either keep it really, really simple and just substitute a crossbow for a rifle, a handgun for or a pistol for a hand crossbow, or like kind of go like with treating them as rare, unique items. I mean, in my setting, if somebody who is not from Lantan gets one of these guns, like people get sent from Lantan to retrieve them. Like there's people who that's their job, right?
Yeah, I really like that. And obviously one of your players got a handgun, and you then went with an option that I think is a good one as well, which is that make it a magic item. Make it clear to the player that you're not meant to fire this as your weapon in combat. It's very much meant to be when it's a serious time. You have consumable ammunition, limited access, but it's much stronger than everything else.
Yeah.
So it becomes a moment when you pull out your firearm and you fire it. And then now it can be better. It can have that oomph, it can have that impact, because it's only going to happen. I think he fired it, like 5 times in a year, half a year. Yeah, 6 months, yeah, exactly.
Excellent. All right. Well, today was an extra long one because we had lots of stuff to discuss. But thank you so much for watching, everybody. Please let us know in the comments below your feelings about firearms in D&D. I know a lot of people kind of feel like it is a big no-no. So I'm interested to hear people's thoughts, as well as the kind of gritty, low magic style D&D. How do you feel about it? Do you prefer that? Are you fed up with the magic system kind of like we are? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, Erik,
keep slaying.
If you've enjoyed this content, then please smash that like button, subscribe, share this around online, and come and visit our website, www.lavictoriaproductions.com, to see all our past episodes, as well as our blog posts and all the stuff that we're currently working on at La Victoria Productions. Why not reach out to us and tell us what you think of our videos? You can reach us on Twitter. @MouthLaVictoria is our producer. We are also on Instagram. I am Enano LVP, and our producer is Jazzy J Cherot. We're also La Victoria Productions on Facebook and LinkedIn. Come on by and let us know what you think.